All right, how you guys doing? This is Mike McCormick from Advanced Criminology here in Owings Mills, and I'm going to pick it up. I've talked a couple of my videos, at least one of them in the past was part 3 that dealt with corruption and misconduct within the Baltimore Police Department. I covered that. There are a few things additionally I will cover. This is going to be part 5, but this part 5 is going to be called, it's entitled Checks and Balances and Police Misconduct, and this is on a national scale. The things that we'll be discussing in this particular video, and every now and then I will be referring to a couple of things from the Baltimore Police Department in this. Well, a couple of police departments I will be dealing with, but some of the things I'll be mentioning will have to deal with some statistics from the Baltimore Police Department. And everything that we present to you from Advanced Criminology is based upon our academic pursuit of information here, and as well as from a practitioner point of view as well. A lot of things that we rely on, certainly we'll be relying on Bureau of Justice statistics, FBI statistics, local, state, and federal statistics, published reports in police journals, and the list goes on and on. So anytime that we put out information for your edification and as well as the discipline of criminal justice in general, I'm more than happy to reveal where we get our information from and how old the information is. Lots of times we also do our own investigations. We provide our own statistics. We send people out in the field. I go out in the field from time to time. We do surveys. So, when we get our information, trust me, our information is pretty good in terms of its validity, its credibility. We look at studies, and some of those studies we'll try to duplicate those studies, and quite naturally, any of you who study statistics knows that, one of the better observations is to be able to duplicate studies from across the board and replicate those studies. And if you can, then you can pretty much rely on the results of those studies. So in this particular video, I'm going to start this off by explaining to you, like the lay person who really doesn't understand, why is it that we hear about police officers, sheriffs in some departments, security officers in some security firms around the country. Why is it that we hear oftentimes that some of these individuals have kind of beat the system in terms of their discipline, in terms of being fired, retrained, having to be decertified in a particular state where they receive their certifications as law enforcement officials, and are allowed to kind of skirt the system, if you will, when it comes to being able to be found guilty on departmental hearings, and then be allowed to move to other jurisdictions, either within the state or outside the state. And what we found, and what we've known all along, just the general public really doesn't know it, is that right now there is no mandate, no national mandate for a police officer's law enforcement registration certification system. There is one that exists. There are a couple that exist, but it's all based upon a police department volunteering whatever information that they care to share on a yearly basis to these particular so-called clearinghouses, where human resource departments from around the country of different police organizations can kind of check these certification bases, decertification databases, and be able to find out whether or not an officer had been decertified in another state and some of the reasons why the decertification took place. Right now in 50 states, it's 44 out of 50 states in the United States that have what they call POST. POST stands for Police Officer Standards and Training. So these agencies operate as fundamentally kind of a basic decertification. Some do certify, and some do also decertifications. But we know for a fact there's 44 that do decertifications, and there's 6 states, and I'll give you the names right now of those 6 states that do not decertify. And what you'll find oftentimes is that the states that don't decertify, you generally will have issues in those states when it comes to having to find out really any information dealing with an officer's termination from a police department. Bear with me a second here. I'm looking through this documentation. Here we go. Okay, so those 6 states happen to be California's one, Hawaii, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island. For the sake of really where we found a bulk of some of the issues, just with these 6 particular states. Mind you, there are issues in all 44 states, but we're finding that because it's because they don't have a decertification set up for officers in that particular state. You really don't know why officers were being terminated in those states, because some of those laws will require the court system to release that type of information. You couldn't necessarily get it under the Freedom of Information Act as to why a particular officer was terminated from a job in those 6, at least those 6 states that we have noted down here. And we also added the District of Columbia and Washington, D.C. They don't have the authority either to do decertifications as well. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you was that there was a survey conducted by Professor Hickman, PhD in Seattle University, and he's the department chair for the Criminal Justice Division at Seattle University. He's kind of the forerunner, actually, of a lot of the research and kind of the development of certification practices in the United States that deal with law enforcement personnel. You'll find, if you can track his name is Matthew J. Hickman. If you really go online and you track some of his research, you'll find that he's pretty much on point in terms of the surveys that he and his staff have conducted within the criminal justice field and how it relates to tracking decertification of officers. So you see, lots of times when we see these videos that show officers mistrained, shooting people, not taking care of how they deal with individuals on the street. You see a lot of the brutality tactics that have been used. Many times, some of those officers in those videos that we see are officers that have come from different jurisdictions, officers that have had lateral transfers, and because their backgrounds have not really been researched in depth, they find their way onto departments, whether it was within their own state or in another state. Interesting, though, you also find that there's a cross-reference of officers, of individuals who become police officers, who either worked for correctional systems, private security agencies. Some of them work for universities in the United States. And they do lateral moves all the time. All the time. It takes place more than you know. Okay? In fact, just to give you an idea of some things that you didn't know, let's see here. In 2015, the decertification that we saw, the decertifications that occurred. Now these are everything I tell you. I'll always specify something, whether it's reported or whether it's unreported. So these were reported because, mind you, this is voluntary. This is a voluntary thing that police departments, and it's over 18,000 police departments. So they volunteer to supply this information to individual state agencies in terms of an officer's decertification, or recommending this officer for decertification because of disciplinary actions where he or she was found guilty of either police misconduct, some form of police misconduct. And so in 2015, there were 1,850 decertifications that had taken place. That's 1,850. So we're talking a lot of individuals in law enforcement field who were decertified in 2015. One of the things that then they gave several reasons why some of these decertifications took place. Let's start off with felony convictions, of course, specific misdemeanor convictions, failing to meet training qualifications. Some of those officers, usually that's kind of the academy type disqualification of an officer. Maybe retraining officers in terms of going on the gun range, they don't qualify. They've given the opportunity to qualify a couple of times, and they still can't carry a gun. However, I will tell you, and this is from a practitioner point of view, not academic. When I was on the police department of Baltimore City, I can remember that many people who couldn't qualify on the gun range were given several opportunities to go out there and qualify. And you would even find that some people even found their way to desk jobs where they wouldn't have to go out in the field and carry a gun. You didn't hear that from me. So those are some of the things. One of the other things was termination of employment for cause. And I said any other misdemeanor conviction. And so these are the things, and the most important one is the voluntary relinquishment in lieu of prosecution and revocation was also reported as a basis of the revocation of that particular officer's hearing, of the disciplinary action taking place. And then there was some just reported for unknown reasons, okay? But I think one of the most important things, I want to touch on this because now I'm going to jump back to the Baltimore City Police Department just for a second here. The police department, Baltimore City has now, or is making their way to try to become more transparent with statistics. So on their websites, they're starting to supply the general public with documentation of their general orders and policies and procedures, something they had never done in the past. I'm sure this is a result of the Department of Justice's recommendation that these things be posted online so the general public can have an idea, a working idea of policies that the officers when in the field are supposed to follow day in and day out. So that's being transparent when you can actually find that information. Because I can remember at one time that information was not readily available to anyone other than police officers, or if you hadn't, you had filed a case against a complaint, maybe you could get that information through Freedom of Information Act, or if you had an attorney representing you, they would provide you with those general orders that the police department follow. But in going online and getting some of that information, we downloaded the Disciplinary Review Committee and Administrative Hearing Board dispositions from 2015, 16, and 17. Okay, they're easy to read. This particular information is easy to read. It's just kind of like when you really look at some of the things that what they talk about in terms of the punishments that some of the officers received, dispositions in some of the cases. Now, you need to know there are two things that go on in the City Police Department here in Baltimore when an officer is going to be presented with some type of charge that's been investigated. One is going to be a disciplinary review committee where the officer is he served particular charges, and at that time he can either say yes, I did it, no, I didn't do it, and then there's a settlement at that particular point. And the other one is administrative hearing board, where the officer decides to take it all the way to an actual hearing board. If you recall, just recently, this is the month of November, there have been several hearings now, a couple of Freddie Gray hearings and some other issues going in front of the administrative hearing board now. And so, right now, those hearings are being held. Some of the officers have already been, sanctioned. But that's where they're at. But I wanted to share with you, before I get deep into this national database situation, and before I get into the post, situation of how these things are reported and how officers could kind of just kind of fly under the radar in many, many, many ways. And so you get cases like a Tamir Rice in Ohio, I believe, that the officer had been had been disciplined in another jurisdiction, or he filed to work in another jurisdiction, and then they recommended that he shouldn't or whatever. I believe it was a Tamir case. I'm not sure. If you want to correct me, just shoot me an email, and that would be advancedcriminology@gmail.com. That's what it is. advancedcriminology@gmail.com. And you can put it to my attention, Mike McCormick. So one of the things, and here's, if you can see that. Okay, that's a spreadsheet right there. And on that spreadsheet, it talks about disciplinary. You can see disciplinary review, committee and administrative hearings, disciplinary. And it has a spreadsheet basically giving you the numbers of what happened in those cases. And I'm going to just point to 1 year, and let's go for 2015. That was a big year in Baltimore for those of you who know about the Freddie Gray case and the riots. But in particular, there were approximately 115 cases that went through disciplinary committee and moved their way through the administrative hearing board dispositions. Now, of those 115 cases, there were 45 officers who were served charges. There were 45 there were another 70 officers who had a legal settlement. Now, legal settlement, it can range to a lot of things, where it's sustained, non-sustained, that kind of thing, or no finding at all. But one of the things I wanted to share with you is very important, because this is how, right in this little section I'm going to give you here, is how officers are able to move intrastate from department to department, or from agency to agency, with little or no oversight on the background as to why they were, let go from that department. And there's a little thing called, and I just talked about it. Give me a sec. It's called voluntary relinquishment in lieu of prosecution or revocation. Okay, what does that mean? That all big word stuff. What does all that mean? Basically, it means this: is that you go to a departmental review board or hearing, disciplinary review committee. There's enough evidence actually that if they really pursued your case, they might be able to have you prosecuted by the state's attorney's office for what you did, or there's enough information to send your case on to administrative hearing board for further disciplinary actions. And generally speaking, when you reach that point, there's either going to be a guilty finding, a not guilty finding, a judgment of acquittal, or you're going to be terminated. Most often, if the individual officer feels as though that the police department has enough information to warrant termination, that's exactly what will happen. You'll be terminated from the job. Okay? Now, there's also another way out. And that is what I just read to you in reference to in lieu of prosecution. I just said that about being prosecuted, or revocation, right? And that generally means you don't lose your status as an officer if you decide to go that route. In lieu of, you see, in lieu of. That means instead of you getting terminated out and outright, okay, we can do something else in lieu of that termination. So, officers who are close to retirement generally will retire. That's one way out. Officers can resign. That's another way out. Okay? And so those are the two right there that fall under that category, in lieu of. Now, the difference is this, is that once it's been determined that you either going to resign or retire because the case against you is a strong case to have you really terminated at some point through the process, most officers will opt out for the retirement and then resign. Okay, and when they do that, it goes into their personnel file for human resources department. It's going to say that the officer either retired, and with no other caveat to explain why there's a retirement, because I would not necessarily ask a question if I was a prospective employer. I'm not going to ask an officer, well, why did you retire? Because I don't need to know that. I mean, if you retired, you retired. That's it. And if you resign, generally speaking, it's going to be indicated in your file that you resigned for what? Personal reasons. Okay, well, as an employer, when I call back or I check back, and I'm asking that question as to why did the individual resign, by law, the only thing that police department can tell you is that you resigned for personal reasons. Now, those personal reasons aren't necessarily personal reasons, so to speak. That particular officer was facing domestic violence charges. Maybe he stole something in the department. Dereliction of duty. There are a multitude of things that fall under that category. Now, because it says personal reasons, no caveat as to what those personal reasons are, this is why officers can move through interagencies. They can move and get jobs out of state and work for other police departments. I challenge anyone out there, if this information I'm giving you, if you think it's suspect, if you think it's not true, then certainly contact me, and we'll certainly can present you with documentation that we have, and I'm sure you'll come to the same conclusion. Right now, we pretty much don't get challenged on any information that we put out there. We triple check, double check all our information. Again, as I told you before, we do intense research on all the stuff involved in the criminal justice field nationwide. So we just don't do a lot of local stuff. We do a lot of national stuff as well. And again, I mean, you can challenge our stats, but if we're going to glean stats from the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the FBI, those organizations who all agencies glean their information from, then your argument certainly wouldn't be with us. It would be with them. And again, we stand by that. So that's now I would say the national average was 70% of those cases where officers are really looking to be terminated, flat out terminated. They will either take the retirement option or they will take the resignation option. Okay, so and it's a kind of a win for another department, because a lot of departments are set up for lateral transfers where they work out some type of schedule for the officer, either to do a partial academy training, to do a partial on-street training, because you're coming to the door with quote unquote police training. That's all they see. They don't see the baggage that you're bringing with you from another department. And so because departments around the country are always looking for folks to fill the role of a police officer and to fill the ranks, because it's a job where there is a lot of turnover, and nowadays there's a lot of turnover in the departments. They're looking to retain individuals, and so by not knowing what your personal reasons are, most of them don't care what the personal reasons were. And you certainly can sit there in front of an interviewer and say, well, my personal reasons was I got sick. My personal reason was I got divorced. My personal reason was I just got tired of working in that particular environment, and I'm looking to move into a different type of environment of policing. Whatever excuse that person makes up, it's probably fine with the potential new employer. So I just want to discuss that because the document I just showed you from Baltimore City Police Department, they had that year in 2015, they had 6 people who retired in lieu of termination, and these people were charged with charges of disciplinary action, these 6 officers, and they chose to retire early, which means that more than likely they were close to 20-year retirements, 25-year retirements, 30-year retirements, and had gotten involved in some serious stuff. Also, too, it's you got to understand too, if your pension can be affected, an officer's pension can be affected by disciplinary actions. So a lot of that usually when you see someone who's resigned, it's generally someone who's not close to retirement. So it's going to be officers within 10 years that have been on the department, 10 years and under, maybe 15 and under, who've been in the department that kind of short period of time, so to speak. They're gonna, some officers, you know, once you get to that 15, once you get to that 12, 10, 15 year, that 10 or 15 year mark, it's kind of, you either gotta make up your mind as to not whether you're gonna make this a career or not. Within 10 years, you can kind of go somewhere else or do something else. But once you've been there 15 or 20 years, you've put a lot of time in and a lot of money into the pension system. So you really want to recoup as much as your pension as you can. You can roll over your, obviously you can roll over your 401k into another department very easily. And so that keeps going on when you get hired somewhere else. So a lot of them opt out to do the retirement thing if they're close to retirement. And then again, you take the other ones who, you know, who will resign, which they showed in 2015, 9 officers had resigned. So if I take those 9, add the 9 plus the 6, those are 15 officers who typically could still work on a police department in some form or fashion, or sheriff's department, or work in corrections for that matter. Again, it's across the board. Remember, this is criminal justice. So we deal with the police system, law enforcement, the court system, and corrections. You know, those are the 3 components of the criminal justice system, and now they've added on the nuances of in advanced criminology. Now they're bringing on the community services, so to speak. So you know, you're talking about, you know, the 4 components of the criminal justice system, and so you can find a job in the criminal justice system, even still, as an officer who resigned or who retired. In fact, several agencies around the country are now starting to bring back some of their retirees to work on the force in some capacity. Some of them are working in recruitment now. Some of them working in other areas, property room areas. What they're looking at is this: is that you know, you need guys on the streets who know the streets, who can work the streets. Quite naturally, guys who are retired, you know, that's why they retired, because they got tired of working the streets. So you bring them in-house to do a lot of the support services that police departments need, desperately need. And you can take the people that were in there before who were a little bit younger and put them out in the street and work. And so that's the kind of idea behind it. And you can bring them back for a little bit of money. You're not going to pay them top dollar to come back out of retirement. You're going to pay them something, but not what they were making before they retired. So that's the idea. And again, you bring experience. You know, bringing back some retirees. Okay. So that's why they do it. This is a breakdown. I'll give it to you real quick. This is a breakdown of law enforcement agencies in America, if you didn't know. Because one thing about advanced criminology, when I get on here to talk to you, I'm gonna give you straight facts, give you straight numbers, and let you decide. So this is the latest numbers that we have, is that there's 17,985 state and local law enforcement agencies. There's 12,500. Now this is collect now that into that 17,000. This is a breakdown of that 17,985. There's 12,501 local police departments, 3,063 sheriff's departments, 50 state local law enforcement agencies, 1,733 special jurisdiction agencies, and 638 other agencies, primarily county constable offices in Texas. So when you add those agencies up, the things I've just given you, that total, that's what makes up the 18. When you hear that number broadcasted on TV, World News Tonight or whatever TV, wherever you get your news, CNN, and they tell you it's 18,000, that's a breakdown of what I just told you of agencies in this country. So when we look at the total sworn full-time agencies, of all those agencies I just quoted, sworn personnel, that I mean personnel that can, they have arrest powers, you're talking about 765,000 across the United States who have arrest powers, that are local, that are just in all those agencies. That's what we're talking about, local police officers. And then when we add in the sheriff's department, primary state, special jurisdictions, and marshals and all, it really kicks it up to about 1,100,000 folks who have arrest powers in this country. And you know what? I didn't even add in security. There are many security forces where there are some security personnel that have arrest powers. Believe it or not. Okay, they're not included, I don't think, in this number here, but there are many that there are. A case in point would be the Walmart security. Okay, you get caught shoplifting, they can detain you. That detain is an arrest, is what it is. That's what that detaining is, and they will in turn share their particular documents with local agencies who will come and take you away. So yeah, there. Believe me, you talk about many department stores in this country and other commercial establishments that hire, professional security officers. So that's a huge amount of folks. Okay, so I just want to touched on a disciplinary deal with the agents in Baltimore City, just to let you know those. But I also want to share with you too, even though I showed you this document here, okay, and this is a document that comes off the agency's own website. These numbers are not reflected with the Maryland State Post Agency, meaning that because it's volunteer numbers from each department. Now, when I say departments, I mean every single department, police department, sheriff's department, that has some type of disciplinary agency mechanism on the department are required. Excuse me, not required. It is all volunteer, and so this has always been the back and forth whether or not we need in this country a national database where these things are mandatorily prescribed by the feds to have each state required to submit documentation to the decertifying agencies, so that there is one clearinghouse of all this information, so that it's easy to track officers when they move from one jurisdiction to another, whether it's in-state or whether it's out-of-state. Then it's easier for prospective employers to actually check the database and to make an assessment as to whether or not they want to hire an officer or not. In my estimation, and I don't make judgment on any police department that hires another officer from somewhere else. I make judgment on that particular agency if they don't do a thorough background check. Because certainly we know that background check, if it's not done thoroughly, can certainly come back to haunt you. And there are tons of information and documentation that support why you don't necessarily want to have an officer who's problems for another department working in yours. It's just that simple. The numbers are there to justify not to have those types of folks on your department. They don't deserve to be on your department. And look at it, they were let go from another department. So that tells you right there that they were a problem, and it will probably be a problem for you in the future. Again, because of the nature of law enforcement agencies to have a kind of a closed forum in which they operate with the public, for lack of transparency. That's a big word. That's a catchword since 2015. Is the transparency issue with departments now, and because they traditionally they haven't been transparent, there's always been that secrecy that's projected to the public at large as to what is the department hiding, who are they hiding, and so the public trust in law enforcement has eroded because of that lack of transparency. And so now, mind you, this national certification issue was debated over 20 years ago. Whether you know it or not, it was debated over 20 years ago in 1996, as a matter of fact, when in Congress there were a couple House bills. Well, one was earlier than that. Let me grab these House bills. The first House bill was in 1993, and that's under the 103rd Congress, House Bill 3272. And it was an omnibus crime control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. They piggybacked off of that to establish a national clearinghouse to assist in background checks of law enforcement applicants. That was the first bill. Got shot down. It stayed in committee. It never went beyond the committee over in D.C. And then, surprisingly enough, the same congressman, Mr. Johnson of Florida, who presented the bill, along with several other congressmen, decided to, since there was no action on that first bill in 1993, they decided to try their hand again. And they went back in April of 1996. And again, it was and this is hearing bill 3263. So if you want to look these bills up, it's 103rd Congress, HR bill, House Representative Bill 3272, and then again in the 104th Congress, the House Representatives Bill 3263, again in 103rd Congress, and that was in April of 1996, where both bills were submitted, and yet they never made it out of committee, these bills. And I suspect that the law enforcement lobby, which is huge in Washington, D.C., was certainly there every step of the way to deny any type of national certification of police officers. And mainly, their only argument from some of the stuff that I read had to do with the privacy information. That they felt like defense attorneys could certainly get that information readily and kind of, if officers brought up on charges or if he has to go to court, that they would have this information readily. I think the other issue also had to do with how valid would that information be and reliable how that information would be to a prospective agency that wanted to hire an officer who had been decertified. Because the only way you actually get into the database is that you have to be decertified, period. You're not going to be in the database on suspicion. You have to be in that. You would be in that database because you had gone through the process of a hearing board, trial board, whatever, in your local jurisdiction and subsequently found guilty, and you opted out some of the ways I just said earlier. So that would be the only way that your name would get to that point and be in that database. But since the database's inception, they have certainly been a repository for good information to some jurisdictions around the country, because it was noted in some of the research that there had been plenty of officers who had decided to either move out of state and try to become police officers elsewhere, and their names came back as a hit in the database that was already established. Now again, it's voluntary. That's the problem. You're asking police departments to volunteer information for a national database. It's not mandatory. So when we hear about, and I gave you the big number, I gave you a number of, what was it? I gave you a number of 1,850 officers in 2015 had received decertifications. Now, if it's voluntary, that number is much more, not less. It's much more. And so we can't rely on that number in terms of saying that every department around the country submitted names of officers who have been terminated and the reasons thereof. So again, I'm not necessarily always speculating, but I know when you see those types of numbers and when you give people the option to underreport, they will. It's just like crime stats. When I was on the police department many years ago, there was a thing where, if you could downgrade a robbery to a theft, do it. Because, robbery was a part one crime. And, that reflected highly on the command that, certain amount of robberies, were happening in the city and that they weren't being solved. So if you can downgrade it to a theft, that's what you do. If you can downgrade a first degree assault to a second degree assault, they would like for you to do that as well. But that's the nature of how things were, and in some cases, around the country, that's how they still are. Trust me, that's how they still are in many ways. So I tend to believe that the numbers, because it's voluntary and not made mandatory, which those particular House bills would have, had they gone through the Congress and had they gone through the Senate and had they gone through the normal procedures that a bill would pass through over in Washington and be signed off by the president, certainly those things, we would probably see a better way in which decertifications and how they handle there would be an easier flow of information from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I haven't, and I think that's the next thing that we're going to tackle that in this agency that we work, not my private agency here. I think what we're going to do is we're going to look at the numbers in terms of money spent by cities, counties, and local jurisdictions on lawsuits dealing with officers. You know, it's a staggering amount. We also want to look at, and this is where it gets a little difficult because again, the paper trail is so, you know, it's tough to get a lot of this documentation because it's not readily available. To see exactly how many agencies have brought forth individuals who were hired from other departments and whether those individuals, once they got there, caused more disruption and lawsuits, you know. So you know that's a whole different ball game of research that, you know, we'll get into one day. I did want to mention that when we talk about cops being hired from other jurisdictions without, you know, good background checks, background investigations, it can get out of hand. I'll give you an example. December 3rd, 2013, is reported that the LA Sheriff's Department was hiring cops with shady past. They mentioned of 280 new hires in 2010. The investigation revealed that there were 188 that were rejected for jobs at law enforcement agencies before being hired, actually, by the Sheriff's Department. These people, the 188, were already rejected. But when LA Sheriff's Department wanted to hire them, it showed that of the 188, 97. Well, let me get this right here. Okay, 188 were rejected for jobs at prior law enforcement agencies, right, before being hired Sheriff's Department. 97 showed evidence of dishonesty. 92 were disciplined previously by other police agencies for significant misconduct while on duty. Significant. Okay. 29 were fired or pressured to resign from a previous law enforcement job. And 15 were flagged by background investigators for trying to manipulate the results of a polygraph exam. You must really want to get hired in a department anytime you try to manipulate the results of a polygraph examination. And as one of the reporters said, he said it's one thing to fail a polygraph. He said because the tests are far from perfect. He said it's quite another to get caught trying to cheat on a polygraph test and then get hired anyway. So those are the types of things that are actually going on. And this is as recently as 2013. They also have you also have unions, police unions, that play an instrumental role in helping cops who were forced off the department to get rehired. Trust me. There are unions out there who go to bat for some officers, even though they were disciplined and they were terminated, to bring their jobs back. So that's out there. They indicated in one particular research report that police unions have forced U.S. police departments to rehire more than 450 police officers who were terminated from everything from unbecoming behavior to assault and sexual abuse. Now, this is reported in the Washington Post as late as August the 3rd, 2017. Okay, this year. Okay, and so this is the things that you have going on. I'll give you an example, and this is just one example, and you tell me whether or not you don't even have to be in law enforcement that you wouldn't even hire this person. The Washington Post said there were 1,900 firings from 37 departments across the country since 2006, and found police chiefs had been forced to rehire 451 of the fired officers, one of whom served as a getaway driver, mind you this, for a getaway driver for a suspected murder. And each of the rehirings had one thing in common. Police union contracts required the appeal of a disciplinary measure. In one case in Washington, D.C., police officer underwent an 8-year legal, underwent an 8-year legal battle to rehire an officer who was convicted. Mind you, this officer was convicted of sexually assaulting a 19-year-old in his patrol car. And that officer's union got involved and filed an appeal to the firing, claiming it was too harsh of a punishment. This is what the police union said. The police union needs to be investigated behind this statement. The police union said that sexually assaulting a 19-year-old girl in your patrol car while on duty does not amount to punishment. And that punishment was actual termination. How is too harsh of a punishment in lieu of his ass going to jail for rape? Okay, how is being terminated too harsh of a punishment? I certainly would think that he would have been blessed to know that the state's attorney, district attorney, did not pursue criminal charges. That's his blessing right there. Not fighting an 8-year battle to get back on the police department. And probably that's what should have taken place. When you look back at certain things, it's almost interesting to see why the individual was not prosecuted and why he or she did not go through the criminal justice process as any other person would have to have gone through in similar situation. So I just wanted to bring that up to you, right? It also indicates, this is Washington Post. Now, you know, nobody argues too much with the Washington Post. Even when you listen to President Trump and some of the things he feels about fake news, you don't see the Washington Post having to back down in many, many cases that their investigative reporters do, because they do a thorough job. They're trained. That's one particular institution at that Washington Post, that investigative journalism is a big deal. It's a huge deal, and you aren't just going to go out and just put any story together and work at the Washington Post. That's not going to happen. And like I said before, they have been sued, but nowhere near the amount where they have been discredited as a viable news source of good information. So the Washington Post also indicated that 37 departments that employs 91,000 officers since 2006, and since then there were only 1,881 firings. And it says it's common when unions get involved, and they mean that that number should be higher, but when unions get involved in this kind of thing, that the number tends to be lower. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Now, I've spent 48 minutes on this video, and I only got into a couple of agencies. I talked about the Baltimore City Police Department. We've talked about some other departments over in Washington, D.C. We talked about Nassau County, which we didn't talk about Nassau County, and we didn't talk about Suffolk County on Long Island, New York. But I'll get into that in the next video, because there's some more information I want to provide to you that can you can understand when you see some of the things that go on with our police in America today, why the checks and balances, because I started off this video, and this video is entitled Checks and Balances. Why, when you don't have checks and balances in the criminal justice system, particularly at the law enforcement level, we have the problems that we have with trust with our departments in 2017. It is so relatable. It's not unbelievable for me, because like I said, we look at the stats and we compare and contrast things. But to the average person just looking at TV who doesn't have a criminal justice background, doesn't do any research, it's unbelievable. And even when I do the research, I still find it unbelievable, but it's true. So I'm going to end here. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be putting out another video attached to this, dealing with some more information as it pertains to corruption and misconduct on a national scale. I want to thank you once again for listening and look forward to putting out some more information for you.